I had an early career in Hollywood and thought I would work in the entertainment industry and quickly learn that's not a kinder, gentler kind of industry to be in. I wanted to trade places with someone living on the streets. I hate to say it, that's how I was feeling. This can't be what work life is supposed to be all about. The leader has learned if I yell and scream at people, I seem to get what I want most of the time.
Welcome to the CEOpeek Show, the podcast where we explore extraordinary leadership. I'm your host, Dave Osh, and in this episode, we are joined by Brian Underhill to discuss how mastering coaching skills can significantly enhance leadership impact. Brian is the founder and CEO of CoachSource, the world's largest executive coaching provider. Brian is a renowned thought leader, international keynote speaker, and published author who has dedicated his career to helping leaders drive meaningful, measurable, and lasting change. So let's just dive in. Hello, Brian. Good to see you.
Hi there. Great chatting with you.
Kind of when we checked in, we thought, what will be a good starting point for us to start this conversation today? And I was very fascinated when you come back, hey, how did I become a CEO and what was your journey? So I had a feeling that I heard it sometime before, but I'm curious about that story. Let's get back to that moment.
Well, and these things aren't necessarily planned or intentional. I know for some people they are. In my case, not necessarily at all. I had an early career in Hollywood. I lived in Southern California and thought I would work in the entertainment industry and quickly learn that's not a kinder, gentler kind of industry to be in. And that actually got me interested in how the intersection between business and people could work much better than what I was experiencing there. So I went to graduate school to study organizational behavior, organizational psychology. This is in the 90s, mid 90s in Los Angeles. And I figured I'd come out of school and maybe work for myself and be a consultant. And it would be me and I would go out and do consulting work or something to that effect. However, as I started to work in this field of executive coaching. And I started working with a well-known coach in the field that you and I both know, Marshall Goldsmith, in the late 90s. And at that point, we were doing lots of coaching sessions, but just one session per leader. And the clients started to ask for more coaching sessions and more than just one session. And so Marshall, by default, just had me overseeing all of that, as well as a whole network of coaches that we started to amass during that time. So maybe you would call me a general manager or something of a practice area under him. In the mid 2000s, we spun off into this company, CoachSource, that I'm now this founder and CEO, because some people know their strengths well. Marshall knew he does not like managing large organizations and lots of people and all that goes into that. But I love that part. And so we spun off into our own company, CoachSource. Originally just me and a colleague. We've added people over the years. Today we're about 15 employees, but 1,200 executive coaches who generally run their own businesses, like yourself, around the world. And now we've been in business about 18 years now. So wasn't planning it, didn't realize it would get this big, but this field has really grown. And I guess being lucky or blessed, whatnot, to be at the right place, right time, as this field has really grown through the last 25 years, nearing 30 years at this point.
That's such a beautiful story of that coincidence that led you to where you are today. If I'll take you back to the Hollywood days. So imagine that your leadership journey turned into a Netflix series. What moments you want to be the opening scene and why?
Well, I love that. I have spoken about my early days in Hollywood coming out of USC, right there in Los Angeles. And my friend says, oh, here's some jobs in Hollywood that you start as a production assistant or assistant to this or that or whatnot. And I took a job that was called assistant to TV producer, which sounded nice and glamorous. You get to do TV stuff, I guess. Once I got into the job, it was pretty quickly personal assistant to someone who wished they were in TV, who was famous for other reasons, but was trying to make a go in television. And this is the opening Netflix, is The Devil Wears Prada. All right. Have you seen that movie? This is who my boss was, but a male version. And actually, I noticed the Devil Wears Prada boss doesn't really yell and scream. She's rude, but doesn't yell and scream. My boss would yell and scream and throw things and curse me out for any mistake that sometimes I didn't even make. That wasn't even my fault, but I'd get blamed for stuff. And it was really toxic. And back in the 90s, you were happy to have a job. This is 1991, 92. We had recession then. First job out of college. You were happy to have a job, and you're told that, hey, this is how you start in a place like Hollywood and how you work your way up. So I did that for over a year. Pure misery. It just was absolute misery. So if you're in the Netflix series, you're going to start there with just feeling really down and out. And there were moments when I wanted to trade places with someone living on the streets. I hate to say it. That's how I was feeling. This can't be what work life is supposed to be all about. So that's where you can start in your Netflix series. Episode 1.
Well, that's your Netflix series. It's about you. So I imagine that series will start. The first episode will be somebody shouts at you.
Yes.
When you joined CoachSource, or through that process of starting CoachSource, did you coach executives?
Yes. So when I was with Marshall Goldsmith, that's what we were doing. So we started with, they would get a 360 feedback report, and then one of us coaches would work with the leader for one session only, usually 1 hour, and go through that report with them. And that's what we called coaching way back when at the time, even though you may not call it that today. And then that started to become more of such sessions. And I remember the first time Marshall had us doing 1 year with executives. And we'd been so used to doing 1 hour sessions, we literally didn't know what to do with this executive for 1 year. What are we supposed to do with them? We had to really create a methodology, a lot done by Marshall, a lot done by everyone else around at the time, to kind of have a methodology of coaching. Because in late 90s, there wasn't really any coach training much to speak of. The ICF was very new and we'd never heard of them yet. There was maybe one training organization that anyone had heard of. So it was coming up with this along the way, for sure.
Fast forward, even today, sometimes I coach executives that have somebody shout at him like your first boss in Hollywood. And what you will tell the two of them, the person that somebody shout or very angry or down like you in your first steps of your career, and what you will tell the person that their boss, imagine that you coach both of them.
Well, it'll be dicey to be coaching both at the same time. Sometimes two different coaches may be preferred. Maybe I'll start with the yeller. Well, first of all, it always has to figure out what's behind all of that, right? So what is it that's causing this behavior by this leader? It's not uncommon. Sometimes this person is very task focused. They're very driven. They want to accomplish goals. They have a short fuse, though. They run hot, as I've heard it said. Their car's temperature gauge is almost always out towards the H, the hot side of things. But we need to get behind that and see what's driving all of this. Sometimes it's a deep anxiety this person has. Sometimes maybe not fully understanding how to get the best out of people. Sometimes they have to learn that. There could be a whole number of reasons. Sometimes they're hiding a bit of a imposter syndrome, even that can be known to happen. There can be a number of reasons. We need to get behind that and figure out what is creating this. Now, really critically, the leader we're talking about has to want to fix it, because the leader has learned if I yell and scream at people, I seem to get what I want most of the time, right? Most of the time things seem to happen. So they've learned that that's akin to their success. That has helped them be successful, as opposed to realizing you might have been successful, but it's actually in spite of this type of behavior. This behavior is not helping you. So the leader has to want to fix it and change it. And I've worked with hundreds, thousands of leaders. If this is the area they're working on, some have made great strides and really transformed themselves. Others made very little, no change. Some have been fired. This is can be a very fireable end of career behavior, especially in today's day and age. Back when this happened to me, this was pretty par for the course for many work environments. Today, people won't put up with this. We still have a tight job market. People have a lot better realization of how to treat each other or hope to treat each other. You could have a bad day and have it be put on YouTube and ruin your career if someone were to catch it on film. So there's a lot more at stake to making sure people are behaving properly. So now it's a long answer to say you need to see if this leader wants to fix it, get behind it, learn more about what's taking place, and then start to work with them more about what's causing, what are the triggers? When does this leader get set off? Have them help you understand that. And there can often be situations where this happens and other situations where it doesn't. That can be helpful to understand too. Again, if they're committed to changing, they can often change really fast. They can change quite quickly if they really want to. They usually don't behave like that to their boss. They usually don't behave like that to their customers, right? So they know how to behave. The issue is that with certain people, often their direct reports, they're not behaving properly. So sometimes they just need to bring more of that mindset to everyone they work with.
So what you're saying is there's the underlying trigger for these behaviors that they're not aware, triggered by anxiety. And unless they're aware, they're trying to solve that anxiety through that behavior. The behavior is the solution. And that's the perspective of the leader. So how will you coach the other person that is in the receiving side? How do you coach your younger self in that situation?
Yes. So sometimes we're coaching the other person in this equation, and that person does not have so much authority or power in these situations. And we've coached many a leader like this. And then a number of things, of course, we still have to work on how can our person we're helping influence the situation in a more positive way with their boss. In extreme situations, by the way, our person may need to contact HR or may need to go to the boss of this person, perhaps. But meanwhile, there's a lot to be said about how the person we're coaching is interpreting and processing these behaviors. I have had times where the person is over interpreting what the boss is doing as negative. I remember working with one leader who was convinced his boss hated him. And he was really convinced of this. And now I had interviewed the boss. The boss thought very highly of him. But for some reason, anything she did, he would see it through a very negative lens. All right. So if he got forgotten to be invited to a meeting, he would see it because she doesn't want me there. She doesn't value me. And then we find out just her admin forgot to invite him. So sometimes a lot of this can be, how are you interpreting what all is happening? And, could we be over exaggerating or over interpreting, overthinking signs that the boss is doing? Now, at other times, the boss it's pretty obvious, yelling, screaming, etc. It's not uncommon in coaching. Sometimes if the person we're helping is not having much luck with HR, with other methods to improve. Of course, we would have interviewed the boss, so we may have insights, but we have to watch confidentiality there. It's not out of the question that they'll start to talk about departure. And we can't go back to the company and say, you really got to fix this or you're going to lose this person. That would violate our confidentiality boundaries. But we may encourage them to talk openly with others in the company about, this just isn't tenable. This may not work for me in the longer run. Or, of course, other things like, could there be a transfer? Could you go somewhere laterally within the company? What else could you do to still realize your best while you're here in this situation? Maybe it's temporary. Maybe we all know this boss won't be here too long, or they're going to get transferred or something like that. Not easy at all, but not uncommon either sometimes.
Yeah. What's interesting in what you're saying is like both of them in two sides, the leader and the person that reports to him, driven by similar and not similar, but an anxiety. The anxiety of the boss of not having something they want, so they force their way. And the anxiety over the other side of being helpless or being afraid of the boss or not wanting to lose their jobs and so on. So you see like anxiety drives different behaviors in two sides of the power dynamics. Did I get that of what you're describing these two sides?
It could very well be. And, one thing as you spoke, we are executive coaches who tend to do one-to-one work, but there's some of us who do two-in-one work. In other words, they would actually get in the middle and run a bit of a conflict management arrangement between these two. It makes more sense if it's like two people not working well with each other as opposed to one boss who yells at everybody, because that's different. That's really more the boss that's got to be fixed and changed. But if you have the boss and one person and they just are really at odds with each other, a lot can be done. Instead of coaching one person in that situation, it's more of a consulting maybe arrangement between the boss, the direct report, and the consultant or coach in the middle. And I've seen miraculous work be done there. Sometimes underlying assumptions are not clear. Basic respect, decorum has fallen out, gone out the window, etc. But just a little bit of effort by both sides, plus some skilled mediator in the middle, can actually make tremendous improvements.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. And I did it many times before, bringing two in a conflict together. It's a fascinating process, especially when there's power dynamics, hierarchy, organization structures, and being there and coaching one-on-two rather than one-on-one. It's just like such a fulfilling process.
It can make miracles because you'll have 1 to 2 amazing talents that may not stay if this doesn't work out, or that may not be giving their best, that's for sure, if this isn't currently working. Just think of the cost, this unresolved conflict, to everything from the output of the business, the results, to the mental health of the people involved, and so on and so forth. So sometimes having a great coach, consultant right in the middle of that, let out some steam, from the system, can make tremendous strides. Well worth it.
So I love to ask you something that I'm very curious about you. And because you were a coach and then CEO. I was a CEO and then a coach. And I always wondered what it will be for me, because I didn't have that coaching skills when I was a CEO. And you have them. So I'm really curious, how do you navigate these two hats? Or maybe it's one hat. How do you bring your coach into the CEO role and the CEO into the coach role? And I'm curious, how do you consolidate it? Or is there any convergence between the two, or they're totally separated?
Well, it's such a great question, because coaching skills absolutely can help any leader in their leadership roles. And there's plenty of research to back that up. So if you're a leader and you learn some coaching skills, or you get coach training or whatnot, you'll generally probably be seen as a more effective leader if you start to employ some of that. However, there's an interesting struggle we sometimes have being a coaching company run mostly by coaches like myself or my chief coaching officer or our COO at one point. Sometimes we think of it more from a coach perspective than a business perspective. And sometimes that's not helpful, oddly enough. So we might be overthinking about, well, what would people feel about this? And we should talk to everyone, and we need to get all their input. We need to get all their buy-in. And maybe the business needs a tougher decision than that. Maybe there's someone that's not working out, and we start to overthink that we could coach them, and let's get them a coach and do this, that, and the other thing, when the person is just not a good match for the role. And maybe we need to make a tough call about whether they should stay in this position. I get coaching myself at various points, in my own coach. And I purposely pick coaches, by the way, who are great coaches, but have no interest in working for our company. Like, they're very well established. They could not care less about trying to impress me. That's actually what I need in a coach that I would work with. And he had shared his concern sometimes when you have coaches running a business, that they can over-index on the coaching stuff and not always make the best business decisions as a result. I mean, a simple general philosophy is, when we started the business, we were paying the coaches who worked for us a huge percentage of the amount of money that we were getting paid. And it was almost comical that we could run a business on the small percent that we were taking. And I'm talking like 85% was going to the coach doing the work, or 80 or 90% in our early days. And I like that. I think it's great. Coaches should be paid super well. But then how do we run our business? You need money to do all the other things you do in a coaching business or any kind of business for that matter. And it was hard for us. We were slow to make decisions that might lower the coach pay some and raise the company income, because we need that to run the business. And today's day and age, it's gotten even more complicated to run a business with cybersecurity and cyber insurance and all the different requirements that companies have on their coaching providers. It was hard for us to make that decision. We're coaches first, so we want to see the coaches paid well. There's pros and cons here to running a business as a coach.
Yeah, but this polarity of business and people is not just for a coaching company. It's almost every organization that I work, every CEO has that tending towards the business and less the people, or people and less the business. And somehow you need to leverage both of them pretty equally. I remember that I was really into the business and sometimes didn't see the people at all. I remember that like 15 years ago, we had a crisis in India, and my chief marketing officer, which was much more people, and we tended toward a solution. And she asked me, "What about the people?" I said, "Shit, I didn't think about it at all." And I thought that we need to have both of them to play a role, right?
It's a balance that I know is never perfect. There's no way, and it probably changes over time by many different reasons. But having both in consideration is vital for a good leader. I mean, for some of the basic leadership models from forever ago often looked at the task side of leadership and then the relationship side of leadership, and both needing to be strong to have the best results. And it's common that you have a real driving leader, wants to get things done. They don't think about the people side. They're probably getting decent results out of the people. I'm just making this up. Maybe they're getting 70% of these folks' best efforts. But there's some of these amazing leaders you read about or maybe have seen speak or whatnot who seem to have a great mixture of both. They get the results, but they have this fantastic care for people that really gets people excited to work for them and to bring their best to the organization. And I bet you that's where you see making that leap from maybe getting the 70% of someone's best to a pure 100%, where people are really giving their best discretionary energy, I've heard it called, their best discretionary energy to the enterprise.
I also wonder about your leadership values when they were really deeply tested to the point that you needed to make a very tough decision, probably unpopular, especially when you feel like, oh, I'm more toward people because, well, we are a people company, right? And then sometimes the business side tests that value. And when it tested, can you share some time that you felt that the value is really tested?
There will always be those moments for leaders, and coming back to the values of your company, which should be published and lived by, and not on the wall only, but also the values of you as a human, returning to those and holding up the decision against those is vital. And that'll happen multiple times in anyone's career. And those are testing big moments because everyone is watching and you have to do your thing as a leader, and they're going to judge you based on that. So there's one such example as we're an executive coaching firm, and a very key value, of course, is to do right by our clients, the companies who hire us. Yet at the same time, being coaches, we have to uphold the values of our profession, which have very clear rules on confidentiality and what information is protected and what is not. We've had about 4 cases, and the most recent was the toughest, where our largest client was being sued by someone we had coached. Our largest client needed us to talk about this situation with the person that had been coached. It was going to court, lawyers involved. So the head counsel of this largest client got in touch with us and asked us to allow our coach to speak about information that could help them. And then we hadn't agreed to this. And then their chief learning officer called to ask the same thing. And this is our main client. It's one thing if it's chief legal counsel, someone in HR, the head of HR, whatever. This is the person who's the highest level person that we tend to work with a lot, asking the same thing. And I know this person really well, and we're friends. And it was hard we want to please the client, but we also have to do what's right in the name of our profession, which in this case is very clear. We cannot talk about anything going on in actual coaching sessions unless we get a subpoena, right? Coaching is not protected away from subpoenas. So yes, if we had a subpoena, we would have to talk. And they didn't want to go through the process. I don't quite remember why. It was a tough one because we were feeling a ton of pressure from our biggest client ever. But it does become pretty clear the values of our profession are critical, and we have to uphold those, even if it could cost us. And so we did. We held the line on that, and we did it nicely. We provided rationale and backup for why this was not appropriate for us. We wouldn't be able to be of service here. We'd love to always be helpful for our clients, but this is not one that we could be helpful to. And eventually it resolved itself because it got resolved to everyone's satisfaction. But again, we held the line very clearly. This is not something we can budge on, not even slightly, or we lose all credibility with all kinds of clients. It's not worth it at all.
You share that from the point of view of the company. What is that for you, the feeling, the fear, oh gosh, I may lose my biggest client or big client for that, sticking to the value? Was it just the privacy that dictated by the code of ethics, or was it also something that were in your heart and your belief system?
Well, it was an odd conflict in one sense, because one of our values is to create a fantastic customer experience. So that's with the chief learning officers of our clients, for example, or the head of HR. And the more we can build a great relationship with them, the more that's vital for us. That's a value of us, to build strong relationships with our clients. And when they call asking for something, we want to be responsive and we want to be helpful. We want them to see us as true partners with them. So it was a bit of a clash because the head is calling you and asking for something. And 99.9% of the time, we can do what they're asking. We can oblige out of great service for them. This time we could not. There's no way. Yeah, and they're leaning on every pressure point they had with us. They didn't quite say, oh, we're going to get rid of you. And that didn't happen. But they were leaning on various pressure points to get what they needed, including making the ask a little less obvious or a little less threatening and so forth. So you do have a conflict between wanting to really be service oriented towards your client, but also really protecting and upholding the values of our profession in that case. Actually, our profession has an organization, the International Coach Federation. They have an ethics hotline. And there have been a couple of times that we've called it and said, hey, here's what we got right now that we're concerned with. And we just want to double check how you would all interpret this and see if our thinking is aligned with that. And it's been incredibly helpful. Maybe an example for any leader to be thinking about, is there wise mentors you can go to for times like this that you could get some input from? So we had to take a stand, and we did. And it ended up okay. It worked out the way everyone wanted, and we're still there, and they're still happy. So,
yeah, you know what you share right now shows like the collision that we have between different values. Every value usually has a competing value. When getting attention, it's very hard. You value the relationship in one hand with your clients, and you have another value, which is the integrity of the coaching with the client's clients, or the client's employees that we serve, right? And here they come into collision. And I think that it happens in many companies that serve different markets. Like, I don't know, think about Airbnb. They have the people that host there, and they have the client that they come to be in their properties, right? There is Uber, Lyft with the drivers and the passengers, right? And sometimes there's a collision of values between two populations of client, directly, indirectly, Amazon sellers, and so on and so forth. So that's challenge is actually a collision of values.
well, and for one, hopefully you have your values sorted out as it relates again to your company and you personally. So you have somewhere to go when these things come. But you're very right that it actually could be a collision of some of the values in some way, shape, or form that then you have to sort through as a leader to determine on the other side, where are we taking a stand on this? And people watch, again, everyone watches you when you're a leader to see what it is that you decide to do. And that means a lot. It can be very public in some organizations. So you have to, I was on a podcast yesterday and they said a great saying, something like, with whatever it is that you've decided, would you be okay with that being in tomorrow's news? And if that gives you great pause, you should maybe rethink the decision you're about to make.
I'm kind of today very careful, hang to my values, and I challenge my own values, I have example of me in the past, so much hang to my integrity and sometimes neglect that there's also competing values of integrity. I remember a story, by the way. I don't remember the name or the context, but it was somebody that changed the healthcare system in one of the African countries. It was a huge success, and I cannot recall Tanzania or Rwanda. And he wanted to export that to other African countries. So fast forward, so when he tried to do that, they asked ministers of health, asked for bribe. And he hung so much to his integrity that he was not willing to do that. Fast forward 35 years, he was on interview to CNN, and he said, yes, I won my integrity, but millions of people didn't have access to healthcare. And if I can be 35 years younger, I let go of my integrity because there's a competing value that competed on that. And I don't say that we can learn from that to the case that you shared about it. I think that you did the right decision. But that collision of values are so significant in the way that we run our businesses and run our lives.
That's a great point, because the business or his organization had a very noble purpose, and it is a trade-off. If he paid the bribe, would he get more access that was needed to do that work? That's tough. Those are tough decisions. And I know a lot of the multinationals that you and I serve have to deal with that regularly in different countries in terms of getting things accomplished, and or making sure that folks know that they won't be paying a bribe, or I guess maybe some do. I'm not quite sure how some of these multinationals get some of this stuff done.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question that will make you a little bit uncomfortable. What is that in the context of leadership you feel that you still struggle today and wanted to grow in your journey as a leader?
I'm okay being uncomfortable. I mean, when you're in coaching, you get coached a lot and you take a lot of assessments and you know too much about yourself sometimes. My wife jokes, so you're taking another assessment. Don't you know yourself already? I still take the assessment and then I make her take it too, much to her dismay. But I love making things happen, getting things done, knocking things off the list. I can be a bit too tactical for my own good sometimes, for sure. So my job as the CEO is I've got to be big picture, future thinking, what's going on in the industry, what's going on in the world. Can I see what's happening out there 5 years out? Strategy, big picture thinking. And I can get locked into some minutia pretty fast. It can sometimes fascinate me to get way down into some details somewhere. And it's hard in this company. Since I started it, I've done many of the jobs that we have in today's company. So it's not too hard for me to step way down into something. And my staff calls it swooping in, which I enjoy hearing. Sometimes I'll come out of nowhere and swoop into something to address something. And below what I probably should be concerning myself, I have fantastic people who could do and solve these issues, often way better than me. So sometimes that can be an issue, is to be staying really high level, really future focused, visionary. I feel like I know a lot about our field of executive coaching and all that happens in it, because I go to a ton of conferences, I stay up with people. But yet at the same time, keeping a high level picture, keeping a strategic view. It can be tempting when a client calls with a certain need that's not quite what we do for a living, a little off center or even more off center. It can be tempting to chase that work down, causing lots of running around with people who work here with me. So that's always my bleeding edge, I don't know, area that I have to continue to challenge myself in staying big picture, strategic, etc.
I have a specific question for you as a founder There is the dilemma of founders because they own the company, is that where other people don't own it. And it's different. I was a chief executive without ownership. I was promoted from a COO and I was not the owner of the company. And except of some members of the board, nobody was in ownership position. When an active CEO is the founder, like many other larger companies, even the listed companies, there's in one hand a sense like, oh, they don't have as much stake as I have when they look at the employees. And there's some kind of equality in a boardroom when we sit together because now I'm the CEO, but I am also the founder. I'm the decision maker, the ultimate one, but I'm also have the highest stake. And I'm curious about this dynamic. How do you sense that? Have you thought about it? And how does it come into play when you work with your team?
That's a fantastic question. And the truth is, so you're CEO, but if you're the founder, you very often could be the majority shareholder. You may own all the company or most of the company, in my case, most of the company. Yet at the same time, I want to have real, honest conversations with folks and hear the bad news that needs to be heard and have them tell me when I'm doing something not helpful for them. But it is not uncommon, as you would understand, that not everyone wants to speak up fully honestly at times. I've heard it said around this little company that sometimes they jokingly say there'll be someone who's not going to accomplish a certain task being asked of them unless Brian says so. And people will like throw my name. Well, Brian said he wanted to see that done. Oh, okay, I'll do it then. It's almost a bit of an over deference to Brian's name or whatnot. And I don't want people to just do stuff because Brian said so, because I just talked about I'm not even that most strategic person sometimes. I want the best out of everyone working here, and I need their expertise. I usually hire people on my senior team forever who've been always older than me, who have way more business experience than I do, because I want to learn. I want to hear what they have to say and what their expertise tells them that we should know about, and not have it just washed away because Brian said, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, then people just become a little more of an order taker, if you will, and just do stuff that Brian thought of. And Brian doesn't always have the right answers or the best answers. So getting the best out of folks, this is a challenge, and I recognize it and probably have to use even more skill if I can to really draw out what people want to share, what their best is, have them tell me. I love getting feedback myself. So have them tell me, hey, we were on that call with the client and you were doing these things. That was not helpful. I'd love to hear that. But yes, it's hard to get that feedback. What did they say? I saw a saying forever ago, the two things CEOs will never have to do is pay for lunch or hear the truth.
So let's start to take it to a close. I'm curious, like fast forward 5 years from now, what do you want people to say about the leader that you have become in the next 5 years?
That feels like a tougher question than the other ones you've asked, actually.
Because that will go public. Now they can hold you accountable for that, right?
That's awesome. Well, yeah, being more strategic, I've mentioned already. Our field, I think, may be in a bit of a transition or great transition mode. And you and I are both in this profession, and we can talk to big platforms that do coaching at very reduced prices. We can talk about AI and what's that doing for coaching. And even what is the future of coaching? Is there more variants of coaching, or could coaching be replaced by something else? So, hey, what the leader I've become means we've navigated those things. We're still a very strong company on the other side of whatever these changes could be about, whether that's more and more in the executive coaching space, which is our heart and passion, or some variant therein that seems to be becoming a more emergent trend in the industry. I do get feedback sometimes. I could be more empathetic. I could be more sympathetic. Empathetic really is probably a better word. Sometimes I'll say stuff without thinking it through particularly well. So maybe like you said about yourself, where you sometimes forget the people side. I'm known to be a bit blunt, too blunt, without consideration as much for how someone might receive it or take it. So that also is important to me, to care for people that I'm interacting with. And when I'm not paying attention to that, I sometimes can get myself in trouble. So more strategic, seeing the future of what this profession's all about, and being a better quality human as it relates to care for others. I'd love to see the company in a much better, much stronger place than it even is now. I'll be here a long time. I'm still have plenty of years to go, I would expect, God willing. But I'd love to see the company way off into the future going on wonderfully without me at some point, and that's going to happen. So I would love to see it grow and progress well beyond me. And you can only do that through fantastic people and empowering them.
Yeah. And I sense actually the two opposites come to play. In one hand, you are really a company in this domain. You mentioned we have so much knowledge, participate in so much of what's happening in that domain. So the known, and we are stepping into the unknown. So it's very difficult to be so much in the know and embracing the what we don't know, because things can change very fast with the development of AI coaches, and so on and so forth. So having known our industry, but being also let go of that known to be in the unknown is a very challenging place to be.
Right. And all of us are famous for missing these things at times. I'm sure you can think of any trend throughout your lifetime that you first saw emerging and you thought to yourself, oh, that's ridiculous, or that's crazy, that's not going to go anywhere. And now it's like part of daily life. I said that about cameras on cell phones in the 90s, maybe 2000, I think it was, when I first heard they were putting cameras on cell phones. And I was actually coaching at a company that was building some of these cameras. And I thought, that is so stupid. That's the dumbest idea. Who's going to want a camera on their cell phone? We know how that turned out. So it's a very almost scary consideration in my head of, wow, something so vital I missed initially as a human, as a leader, whatever. It wasn't a leadership issue, but yeah. So you do have to stay very open and not entrenched. I think we always have to challenge our own assumptions about things. And you see this new business erupt, business models show up, and how are they possibly going to survive? Oh, well, some of them do, and very successfully, much to your surprise. So we have to be open to any and all possibilities.
Yeah. So let me go back to that future self 5 years older. Now you mentioned that you are going to be more than 5 years, God bless you. We need to assume that that future self will be much more wiser than you today.
Better be.
I hope it for myself. So what advice this future self, 5 years older, will give to your current self at a personal level, not at a company and a business, and then at a personal level, what is that advice that it will give that younger self?
Woo! That's the hardest question so far. I guess it comes down to people and further growing and developing and caring for people around yourself. Because in the end of the day, that's how things get done, especially in a professional services business and in life. I mean, in all honesty, and seeing myself as a leader, someone who's helping to grow and develop others so that they can take what we're all doing well beyond this. And not only that, of course, in life in general. We do have 4 kids, and I do feel like I do spend a lot of attention on their future and their growth and development, but there's always more we can do there. And in the end of the day, that's all that really matters. So they're going to be here longer than me, and they'll probably only remember some of those investments that you make into them, as opposed to doing more tasks, checking more tasks off the list.
Yeah. Well, that's the biggest leadership challenge of all. Having 4 kids and help them grow, I find that's the hardest, even more than the business in many ways.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And they sometimes know when I'm trying to coach them, and they call me out on it. So,
Actually, my wife is also sometimes when are you trying coaching me?
yeah. And we joke too, because you may have this as well. They don't really understand what we do for a living. I long for the day when coaching is well known enough that people know what you do, where you don't have to give 4 more sentences to explain what an executive coach does. So it's something I often say. So my kids love to joke that they have no clue what I do for a living, and they make up funny excuses, reasons, and everything from a motivational speaker to a stay-at-home CEO. My daughter calls me a stay-at-home CEO. Well, I do work from home and I am a CEO, but then because I'm the one working from home, then I'm the one who has to greet the cable guy or bring in the Amazon packages and go to the gym in the middle of the day or, that kind of thing. So it's all in good fun.
Looking forward to see this new title on your LinkedIn profile.
Stay-at-home CEO. I'm going to have to forward her this podcast.
Brian, it was such a pleasure to have you. I really enjoyed that conversation and your vulnerability and the depth that we went into that conversation. So really, truly appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been great, our partnership and friendship over these years. Thank you for having me. And God bless you and everyone listening.
Thanks you. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.